to the witnesses for joining us today. Experts have deemed the United Kingdom's retail distribution review as being effectively identical to the Labor Department's rule. In the eyes of not just industry, but the British government itself, implementation of that RDR review created what they called an advice gap that locked out middle and lower income savers from investment advice. And I've studied the Johnson report about the Department of Labor's communications with the SEC during the lead up to the rule's release. I share the Senator's frustration with the Department's lack of cooperation in releasing all of its communication with the Commission regarding its rule. So I'm just going to ask Mr. Flannery, did the DOL and the SEC communicate about the impact of Great Britain's RDR on British consumers, and if so, to what extent? And if not, why did the SEC not think it relevant to reference the fact that a developed economy has already implemented a rule similar to the DOL's rule, and this was no longer a hypothetical situation?
The retail distribution review, which I think took effect at the beginning of 2013, we viewed in the SEC, we viewed that as an extraordinarily interesting policy step. We could call it an experiment because it didn't involve us. I undertook a couple of conference calls with people over in the regulatory agencies there. With me on those conference calls was one of my staff who was involved in dealing with the Department of Labor economists. So we conveyed certainly that information to them. I don't know in what form. I'm not familiar with the details, but certainly the information was conveyed through that individual.
But information coming back the other way about the advice gap that they were experiencing in Britain with middle income and lower income savers from investment advice, that information was being collected or studied?
Well, it was certainly conveyed to the Department of Labor. When we are asked to provide technical advice to any organization, we provide technical advice based on our expertise with our institutions in our space. So if we send over comments or suggestions, those people are operating in a different regulatory environment under different legislation, and it's therefore their decision which of our comments is most appropriate to their situation.
I was going to ask Mr. McKessie a question, and this goes to the issue of the office's creation under an amendment I offered in this committee. It came as a result, actually, of Harry Markopoulos's struggle, which he explained to us, his decade-long travail to bring Bernie Madoff's Ponzi scheme to the attention of the SEC, and in particular, his frustration year after year after year, the failure of the SEC to take any action against Bernie Madoff. So the idea, in a nutshell, was that by establishing a separate office within the Commission, the SEC would be better situated to protect whistleblowers and ensure that their concerns are, in fact, acted on and not handled as that previous situation was. Do you think the new structure is working, and what could be done to improve it? And I'm also concerned that, not unlike the gaps in coordination we had between regional offices and divisions in the SEC before your office was created, there may be gaps in coordination with other parts of the government. How does your office coordinate with other federal agencies that allege conduct that is beyond the SEC's jurisdiction? That is the thrust of what I'm concerned about.
So I think the creation of the Office of the Whistleblower, by the way, I'm very grateful for it because it created my job. I think it has been effective in encouraging whistleblowers to come forward. I certainly have had a number of meetings now with Mr. Markopoullos and gathered his thoughts on how we can be as effective in advocating for whistleblowers. I think beyond the Office of the Whistleblower, there are other structural changes in the agency that I think have have been effective in dealing with issues like information gaps, the creation of the Office of Market Intelligence, which is a centralized office that centralizes all the intelligence that comes into the agency to make sure that when we get a tip from a whistleblower, if it's related to something that somebody's already looking at, that it finds the right home, and that we don't have competing offices working on the same matter. So I think, and at the end of the day, I think the fact that the whistleblower office provides 3 benefits to whistleblowers: confidentiality, anti-retaliation protections, and the ability to be paid, has created real incentives to allow people to come forward if they otherwise were unwilling to or reluctant to. And I think we're seeing the results of that in the fact that we've solicited over 16,000 tips since the program went into effect.
Good, good. Well, thanks again, Chairman Garrett. Thank you.
Gentleman from Massachusetts, 5 minutes recognized.
Good morning. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank the witness.